In the corridors of the hospital, a large number of zombies have gathered and the door is about to be broken open by them. In order to save Roberta's life, Murphy had no choice but to put her into a body bag, hoping to escape the impending danger. Just as he had pulled the bag close, the zombies rushed in and flooded the room. Roberta quickly closed her eyes, praying for safety. Luckily, the zombie horde wandered aimlessly through the room without noticing them. Murphy looked up with a deep look in his eyes. He was now certain that the zombies wouldn't attack him. They even seemed to fear him to some extent. Coldly surveying the room, Murphy's gaze fell on the cabinets where his companions were hiding. A sinister thought crossed his mind, opening the cabinets to eliminate these people and secure his freedom. Fortunately, he couldn't bring himself to do it and simply left the room. Murphy stepped onto the street, surrounded by zombies who willingly cleared a path for him. This realization gave him a preliminary understanding of his newfound abilities. Looking around, he felt a surge of confidence. In this apocalyptic world, he believed he could outlive anyone. Suddenly, he noticed two zombies staring at him. At that moment, he felt a glare in his eyes and looked up to see a hole in a window on the floor above, with a shadow moving inside. He circled around to the front door, intending to investigate. Downstairs, a zombie in red clothing, surprisingly acting human, blocked his path. Moving quietly upstairs, Murphy approached the room and discovered only a woman and a child inside. The mother and daughter were tense, fearing that a stranger might have malicious intentions. However, Murphy was interested in the food and water on the table. Taking everything for himself, he hadn't spoken a word since entering. After taking what he needed, he prepared to leave. However, the woman quickly spoke up. "You can take the things, but please leave some water for my daughter, and if you happen to see the man in the red jacket outside, at least tell him we're waiting for him to come back." But before the woman could finish her sentence, Murphy just walked away. Life is hard, indeed. The zombie in the red clothing downstairs was the woman's husband. The man, even after turning into a zombie, instinctively guarded the entrance, which explained why he had stopped Murphy earlier. Now, as Murphy left, he understood. Initially intending to close the door, he thought twice and decided to open it, guiding the zombies inside. In that moment, human nature was on display. Nobody knew Murphy's thoughts. No one knows what Murphy was thinking. It's possible that he thought it would be difficult for the mother and daughter to survive and it would be better for them to be reunited. Alternatively, it could be the unease of conscience, fearing the discovery of his act of looting. Meanwhile, in the morgue, the zombie horde continued to linger. Roberta, in close proximity to the zombies, felt extreme nervousness. Cassandra in the cabinet shared the panic, fearing the door might accidentally be bumped and not wanting to die alone. Contrastingly, 10K slept soundly, his snores audible. Otis was in a bad way. He had a phobia of confinement and was losing control of his emotions as he listened to the zombies hissing outside. Doc tried to comfort Otis, advising deep breaths to maintain composure, but Otis, even preferring to face zombies in combat, didn't want to stay in such a confined space. The results were predictable, with screams echoing throughout the room. An hour later, the zombies had migrated, leaving only scattered remnants on the street. Murphy, carrying a backpack, moved through the area, conflicted about whether to return and reunite with the team. All along, he had sensed that these people didn't truly respect him, not even considering him a friend but more like transporting goods. However, at the doorstep, he hesitated, recalling Garnett's sacrifice and realizing he couldn't bring himself to abandon the group. Inside the morgue, only one zombie wandered. Roberta had an intuition that the zombie had sensed her presence. Fortunately, Murphy arrived in time, mentally commanding the zombie to leave. And surprisingly, it worked. Murphy unzipped the bag, revealing Roberta's face. In that moment, Murphy finally felt a sense of belonging. They then gathered around the dissecting table and ate the food Murphy had brought. Praises and compliments filled the air, everyone acknowledging Murphy's achievements. Even the usually reserved 10K gave a thumbs up. For Murphy, hearing the praises, his heart blossomed with joy. In the journey with the group so far, he had finally earned recognition. He's no longer just a piece of cargo, but a true friend. At that moment, Murphy looked up at the window, recalling the smiles of the mother and daughter, but his expression gradually shifted. He urged them to leave quickly, sensing Murphy's changing emotions. Roberta guessed that the origin of the food might not be as simple as he had claimed. However, in the apocalypse, everyone had done things they never wanted to do. It's been 3 years and 7 months since the outbreak of the apocalypse, and the X-team is still a long way from California. Their vehicle had broken down, forcing them to walk for dozens of kilometers. Now, All they wanted was to find a place to rest. However, they seemed to have lost their way. Roberta, consulting the map, was puzzled as there should have been a small town around, but all they could see was an endless forest. At this moment, 10K reminded them to look ahead. Not far away, there seemed to be a factory gate wide open. Exhausted, they decided to go inside to find a safe place to rest. Inside the factory, there were no zombies in sight, but they noticed that the doors were all locked. Doc, however, easily picked the locks with his universal key. Once inside, armed and cautious, they discovered that the place used to be a factory with relatively new machinery. Murphy even found a jug of drinking water. A small piece of good news, but before they could relax, a zombie appeared in the distance. Roberta quickly instructed them to hide behind the door and keep quiet. Strangely enough, the zombies were glowing green, which was a bit weird. Murphy's awkward noise drew the zombies' attention, and it started approaching them. The others couldn't stand it any longer. Doc, shocked at the strange zombie on the ground, exclaimed that he had never seen anything like it. The others were equally amazed. Suddenly, more zombies emerged. Roberta fired a shot but ran out of bullets. At that moment, the door was kicked open, and two people in protective suits walked in. One of them shouted not to touch the zombies, and then he used his gun to eliminate the remaining three. Roberta wanted to take a closer look at the strange creatures, but the man stopped her once again. To confirm, he led them to a nearby hill and instructed them to look up. X-Team was astonished to see two giant spheres emitting yellow dust, a nuclear leak. The man, introducing himself as Wilbur, then brought them to their living quarters. Alongside him was his daughter, Amelia. In the now deserted town, only 3 people remained. As Wilbur continued his story, he suddenly started coughing violently, his face turning pale. Following him to his home, he used instruments to check the team's radiation levels. Fortunately, their radiation levels were still within the normal range, but they might develop symptoms in the next 20 years. They weren't too concerned about this, as survival in the apocalypse was uncertain, and living for another 20 years would be a luxury. Wilbur delivered more grim news to them. The reactor core was on the verge of melting down, and if it wasn't shut down, everything within a 300-mile radius would emit a green glow, making survival nearly impossible for anyone. Murphy, alarmed, immediately inquired about the availability of vehicles for their escape. However, Wilbur revealed another tragic reality. Usable vehicles in town had been taken, and the remaining ones were almost all scrapped. Additionally, the reactor was set to explode in less than 48 hours, making it impossible to walk out in time. Wilbur, though, chose to stay behind as there was a slim hope, attempting to shut down the reactor to spare the land from radiation for the next 10,000 years. Murphy was initially elated at the prospect of leaving by plane, but Wilbur delivered another blow, saying, "Do you think this plane can carry many people? It can only take one at most." Roberta realizes the gravity of the situation and stresses the importance of Murphy. He is humanity's last hope and nothing can go wrong. Before Roberta could finish, Wilbur burst into laughter, considering it the funniest joke he had heard. It wasn't until Murphy exposed his wounds that their expressions changed. Unwilling to wait for doom, Roberta decided they would join Wilbur in shutting down the reactor. Quickly, Wilbur led them to the factory exterior, outlining his new plan along the way. Once the iron gate was opened, X-Team's mission was clear: kill zombies to cover Wilbur's entry into the laboratory. However, they were strictly warned not to touch the bodies. Displaying leadership, Roberta directed 10K to cover from a high vantage point, while Murphy and Amelia waited outside the door. If anything happens to them, Amelia will fly Murphy to California. The action commenced as Doc pushed open the gate, and they charged inside. Their formidable combat skills made zombie killing seem effortless, all while strictly adhering to Wilbur's caution about avoiding physical contact. After 30 seconds they cleared the zombies outside, and then they entered the factory. Without protective suits, they couldn't spend more than 2 minutes in this area due to radiation risk, so time is of the essence. The zombies inside are coming out at the sound of the noise, but luckily there aren't too many of them. Roberta seemed to unveil new combat techniques. When they got to the lift, Wilbur told them to get out. They'd only be exposed to radiation if they stayed here. He'd do the rest. They wasted no time. Swiftly exiting the factory, 10K breathed a sigh of relief at the sight of his companions. He didn't want to lose them. Half an hour later, Wilbur stumbled out, barely holding on, resembling a flickering candle in the wind. Wilbur hung on to his last breath to tell them that he hadn't succeeded, and then he closed his eyes. When he reopened them, Wilbur had turned into a zombie. Roberta sent Wilbur on his last journey with a heavy heart. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Without transportation, escaping the radiation zone within 48 hours was impossible. Roberta believed that the only solution was for them to go in and shut down the reactor themselves. The problem was, they had no idea how to do it. While they initially thought Amelia, being Wilbur's daughter, might know. She confessed to being a pilot and not having a clue. However, Amelia did know someone who could help, the former chief engineer of the nuclear power plant, Homer. When the apocalypse arrived, Homer retreated into the woods, living a secluded life and being highly reclusive. With no other options, they decided to attempt to contact Homer. Approaching his residence, they encountered various traps. Amelia mentioned that there were landmines buried underground, but thankfully, these were set up to deter zombies and weren't particularly well hidden. 10K was a military buff, these were no problem for him, so they went ahead and scouted out the road and then tumbled in behind the house. 1 minute later, Doc and the rest confirmed it was safe, and they began their cautious approach to the front door, ready to ambush whoever might be inside. But they didn't expect, before he could count to 3, 10K's knife was at his neck, and Roberta and Amelia were also around him. Homer thought they were here to rob him, so he let them do it. After they explained their intentions, Homer no longer harbored any hostility. Instead, he invited them into his home and even offered some food to welcome them. When it came to the matter of the nuclear power plant, Homer not only didn't hesitate but also distributed some of his cherished weapons to them. Murphy strolled leisurely, seemingly unconcerned, and discovered Homer had hidden a stash of alcohol, which excited him greatly. However, Murphy's excitement was abruptly interrupted by the serious demeanor of Roberta. In fact, they all have the wrong idea about Homer, that he's difficult to work with and unwilling to help. In fact, Homer had come to the woods because he had no faith in life after the death of his son. He was now looking at the young 10K and it reminded Homer of his son. He was the same age and if he had lived he would have been this tall. After some preparation, they were ready to embark on another mission to the nuclear power plant. Their survival would hinge on this attempt. Homer informed them that this time they would be entering the highly radioactive core area, and there were only 2 sets of protective suits. One person had to collaborate with him. As soon as it was said, 10K walked out, seeing his father's shadow in Homer, and so, 10K and Homer, clad in protective suits, charged into the nuclear power plant. They rushed towards the direction of the control room, with a precise marksmanship. 10K took down zombies with almost a single shot each. 3 minutes later, they found the control console. It was only then that Homer discovered the problem. No wonder Wilbur had failed. One of the reaction pools was still running, but the electronic switch showed it was off. There must be something jammed that needed to be cleared for restoration. However, doing it manually would be very dangerous. Fortunately, Homer remembered there was a robot here, which he could control remotely. The robot had a laser that could penetrate anything. As it manipulated switches, the small robot set off. Encountering zombies blocking the way, the robot unleashed its laser, cutting them open with brutal efficiency. But the good times didn't last long. 2 zombies seemed to realize the threat and, surprisingly human-like, picked up the robot, intending to tear it apart. Homer considered releasing the laser again, but to his dismay, the screen went black. The little robot was killed and they had no choice but to return. They informed Team X about the situation. Now, the only solution was to manually shut down the reactor. However, the radiation there was beyond imagination, requiring high-intensity protective suits. There were 2 sets of this equipment in the passage where the robot was lost, so 4 people could go in. For safety's sake, Roberta wants Amelia to fly the plane and take Murphy away. At this moment, Amelia finally spoke the truth. It turned out the plane had run out of fuel long ago, and all along, she had been claiming she could escape just to stay and accompany her father. Roberta, having once modified a car to burn alcohol, believed the plane engine could be adapted similarly. With ample alcohol on hand, they had to try. Ready to act, Roberta assigned tasks. Others would assist Homer in shutting down the reactor, while she, Murphy, and Amelia would modify the engine. The 4-person team quickly reached the passage and donned protective suits. They push on, with less than 30 minutes to go before the reactor explodes. They have to hurry. As they moved forward, Roberta, having gathered several boxes of white liquor, led Murphy to Wilbur's warehouse. She hoped the airplane engine and car engine were not too different. Fortunately, the basic principles were similar, and in about 10 minutes, Roberta completed the modification. Amelia took the rest of the booze with her and hoped it would be enough to get 300 miles away. Roberta knew that Team X was facing a life-threatening situation this time, and as she and Murphy parted ways, there was a hint of choking in her voice. Murphy, too, put away his usual playful demeanor. Roberta's words made him realize that this separation might be the last time they see each other. Shortly after, the plane successfully started and slowly moved towards the distance. With tears in her eyes, Roberta hoped that Murphy, carrying the hopes of everyone, would successfully reach California to save humanity. Just 5 minutes into the flight, Murphy kept talking incessantly. Suddenly, the plane started shaking violently. Amelia reassured Murphy not to panic, attributing it to encountering strong air currents, but before she could finish her sentence, the shaking intensified, and the plane headed straight for the grassland. I don't know how long it took for Murphy to get out of the cockpit. He couldn't believe he was still alive. He hurriedly went around to the other side to check on Amelia. When he opened the door, he froze. Amelia's chest had been pierced by rebar and she had been turned into zombies. Murphy felt a pang of sadness. He had intended to give this girl a merciful end, following Roberta's example with Garnett, but looking at her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Turning around, Murphy ran outside and found a rock on the ground, ready to take care of it remotely. However, he froze again. Amelia behind him didn't go berserk. Instead, she mimicked his movements, clumsily touching her own forehead. Murphy couldn't bring himself to harm her. He simply took his backpack and left, with Amelia following behind. On the other side, 10K and the others had reached the entrance of the reactor. However, the radiation inside was too high, rendering ordinary protective suits ineffective. Homer insisted that they leave, leaving the rest of the task to him alone, but 10K refused to back down and insisted on helping. Homer chuckled and accepted, knowing that with reinforced protective suits, they should be fine. Upon opening the door and entering, they were immediately confronted by a few zombies. 10K makes quick work of them, but one zombie lunges at Homer. It was only then that they noticed a large hole bitten into Homer's protective suit. Homer instantly felt despair. Even if he shut down the reactor, he wouldn't survive for long. However, he faced his imminent fate with acceptance. Since stepping through the gate, he had been prepared for sacrifice. Being able to spend a few hours with 10K was the happiest time in Homer's recent years, much like having his son still by his side. After a few moments of emotion, they made their way to the top of the reactor. Below, the blue liquid contained the most intense radiation. The failure of the two rods to descend made it impossible to shut down the reactor automatically. They had to use a harness to lower someone manually and align the rods. If someone fell into the liquid, not even bones would remain. As Homer descended slowly, he almost touched the surface. Using his hands to press the rods downward, the first one succeeded. Next was the second. Homer had closed his eyes, the radiation causing unbearable discomfort, as if he were being roasted over a fire. Now, he relied solely on willpower to endure. With a click, they succeeded. The reactor was closed. Not only was Homer exposed to this intense radiation, but he touched it with his hands, and every moment he lived was an ordeal. The radiation inside the reactor was so horrible, Homer melted as soon as he fell in. 10K, both sad and angry, walked out in a fury. The others outside breathed a sigh of relief seeing 10K unharmed. 10K was furious with his own helplessness. He had once watched his father slowly turn into a zombie, and that had been the first zombie he killed. Now, witnessing someone like a father figure, Homer, die in front of him, he felt powerless. Roberta arrived in an electric car, relieved to learn of their success. The car could take them some distance. However, Doc sighed, wondering where they should go now. Murphy might already be close to California, and they had no target. As Doc finished speaking, a figure appeared walking up from below the slope. Murphy, who had traveled only 10 kilometers but said he had traveled 160 kilometers, sat in his car, took out a bottle of wine and drank it. When asked about Amelia, Murphy pointed into the distance. Seeing the scene, it was truly heartbreaking. However, what they didn't understand was why Murphy didn't give Amelia a merciful end. This was considered the highest respect for a friend. Roberta stood up to come herself, but Murphy stopped her. The others hesitated but didn't insist. They trusted Murphy's judgment, and so the group of 5 traveled away in this patrol car, just wondering how many kilometers they could travel.